She was the billionaire's only daughter, young, brilliant, and utterly broken. No maid ever lasted more than an hour in that mansion. Until one night, a janitor walked in, a single dad, carrying more pain than pride, with a 6-year-old daughter who built robots to fix her mother's memory. They weren't hired to heal her, but somehow, they did. Because sometimes, healing doesn't come in a prescription bottle. Sometimes, it comes in the form of a letter. One you never thought you'd send. If stories like this speak to your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the very end. You won't just hear a story today. You might just feel something you didn't know you needed. Now, let's begin. The letter had no envelope, just one sheet of ivory paper, slightly creased, the ink barely dry. It slipped quietly beneath the heavy wooden door, landing on the polished floor of the East Wing corridor, a place no one had walked for weeks. Henry Callahan wasn't supposed to be in that hallway. His janitorial assignment was for the lower levels only: hallways, the main kitchen, staff break rooms. But tonight, the cleaning schedule had changed. A short-staffed evening, a long corridor that no one wanted to touch. He bent down to pick it up. The handwriting was delicate, trembling like someone had written it with their breath held. It read, "If you've ever lost someone to war, maybe you understand why I no longer want to live." Henry stood still. He didn't know who had written it, but he understood. And that night, when his shift ended and the building was silent except for the hum of distant security systems, he returned. He found a scrap of old stationery in the storage closet. He sat on an overturned bucket with a cheap pen and wrote 6 words. No more, no less. "I understand. Afghanistan, 2009. She didn't come home." He slid the paper under the same door, turned, and walked away without looking back. Inside the room beyond that door, Mara Wexler sat motionless on the floor. The reply sat beside her knee like a forgotten confession. She had read it 3 times. It was the first human response she'd received in 3 years that didn't come from a therapist, a doctor, or a father trying to schedule her next session. She didn't know who he was, but she didn't feel entirely alone anymore. The Wexler estate sat on 40 acres of perfect silence just outside of Palo Alto. Marble floors, biometric locks, 2 kitchens, a glass atrium, and not a single room with warmth. Mara lived in the East Wing. No one else did. 3 years ago, she had graduated from Brown University with a double major in English literature and classical philosophy. 6 weeks later, she lost the man she was going to marry, a Marine lieutenant named Drew, with a smile that made her want to write again. His death came in the form of a knock at the door, a folded flag, and a chaplain who couldn't look her in the eyes. Since then, Mara had not spoken more than 3 full sentences to anyone, 37. That was the number of maids, caretakers, and nurses who had cycled through the East Wing in 3 years. Most didn't last more than an hour. Some left crying, others left angry. All left saying the same thing. She doesn't want help, she wants silence. Raymond Wexler, her father, a tech billionaire known for founding a cybersecurity empire, tried every resource money could offer. Doctors, therapists, holistic experts, even spiritual healers. None of them made it past the hallway to her bedroom, until now. Henry Callahan didn't know anything about therapy. He wasn't trained in mental health. He was just a former soldier with calloused hands, a permanent limp, and a daughter who still asked why her mother never came back from the hospital. He had taken the janitor job because it paid enough to keep Lucy in school and gave him the nights to think, or to avoid thinking. He hadn't meant to become part of anyone's story. But now, this letter, this reply, this connection, it stirred something inside him that had been still for too long. The next night, he returned. No words, just routine. He mopped the marble tiles in silence, paused briefly at the door from which the first letter had come, then moved on. He didn't expect another note. But as he packed his cart to leave, he noticed a new slip of paper near the same threshold, smaller this time, just a torn corner of notebook paper. It said, "What was her name?" He stared at it, then exhaled, quietly, slowly, before scribbling a reply. Elena. That was it. No backstory, no elaboration, just her name. Mara placed the reply beside a small wooden box tucked under her bed. Inside were 73 letters she had written and never sent. Most of them to Drew, some to herself, some to no one. None had been answered. Until now. She sat back against the wall and closed her eyes. In the distance, she could hear the faint buzz of a janitor cart rolling down the hallway. It wasn't much, but it was something. Downstairs, Henry leaned against the staff exit, the cool air of midnight brushing against his skin. He wasn't sure why he kept replying. He only knew that when he did, the tightness in his chest seemed to loosen, just a little. Maybe that was enough. For now. 3 days before the letter. The east wing of the Wexler estate stood like a museum no one dared enter. Silent, immaculate, and heavy with the weight of grief that had settled into the very walls. It had been built for guests, for celebration, for the life Raymond Wexler thought his daughter would have. Now, it served as the quiet prison of a woman no one could reach. Mara Wexler had not left her wing in 74 days. She didn't speak. She didn't dine with staff. She ate, if at all, at odd hours. Sometimes 3 a.m., sometimes not at all. She had her groceries delivered to the inner hall and took them in when no one was watching. And every morning she wrote. Letters. Always letters. They sat stacked in piles inside a cedarwood box under her bed, each one dated, each one unsent. Some addressed to Drew, some to herself, a few to no one. She didn't care about the names anymore. What mattered was that the words were out. Not spoken, but written, controlled. Safe. Outside her door, silence reigned. Another maid had quit the week before. 38 and counting. The last one had made it 40 minutes. She had been cheerful, overly cheerful. She offered Mara lavender tea and compliments, and an awkward smile. Mara didn't say a word, just stared at her until the woman's voice cracked, and she left the tray on the floor, nearly tripping on her way out. Raymond was running out of options. That's when the cleaning company reassigned Henry Callahan to the upper floor. Henry didn't ask questions. He was used to boundaries. He had served in special operations for nearly a decade, and the art of silence had been drilled into him. He preferred it, really. After the funeral, after Elena's hands had gone cold in his, after Lucy's wide eyes kept asking, "Where's Mom?" even though she already knew, he stopped talking unless it was necessary. Henry was efficient, quiet, and thorough. That's why the Wexler team liked him, and that's why they trusted him with the East Wing, at night, when no one else wanted to be there. He didn't know much about the woman who lived behind those doors, just that she didn't want to be seen, didn't want to be heard, and definitely didn't want to be helped. He understood that kind of isolation, and he respected it. The first time he brought Lucy was by necessity. His usual babysitter had a fever. Lucy, a wide-eyed 6-year-old with a chipped tooth and a brain that moved faster than most computers, had grown up in hospitals and back seats and military housing. She was adaptable. Always had been. She sat quietly in the janitor's closet with her tablet, drawing little robot sketches or solving logic puzzles Henry printed out for her from old coding sites. That evening, while Henry was wiping down the stairwell near the East Wing control panel, Lucy peeked her head out. "Daddy," she whispered, "the wall screen's blinking." Henry followed her gaze to the small control panel beside the locked wing. It was old, original to the house, and barely functional. The system managed lighting, climate, and access for the East Wing. "Don't touch it," he warned softly. Lucy blinked up at him. "I can fix it." Henry gave her a look. "No, it's not our job. And that thing's tied to the main network. You could break it." "I won't," she said confidently, then turned and disappeared back into the closet. But an hour later, when Henry returned from cleaning the upper hallway, the blinking had stopped. Not dimmed. Fixed. The soft hum of the lighting system returned to normal. The flicker that had been irritating the hallway camera for weeks was gone. And taped to the side of the panel in purple glitter pen was a sticky note. "You're welcome. Lucy." Mara saw all of it. From her side of the hallway, tucked in shadows, she watched through the internal camera feed on her tablet. She had noticed the glitch weeks ago and had muted the alerts out of frustration. But now, without warning, it had stopped. She pulled up the log. Power fluctuation, corrected. System realignment, recalibrated. Code override, temporary. Manual input. Manual? She replayed the feed. And there she was, a child, blonde, small, seated cross-legged on the floor, with a tangle of wires and an ancient touchpad keyboard balanced in her lap. Mara blinked, then blinked again. No one had touched her tech in months. Most staff weren't even allowed near the control panels without permission from her father's IT team. But this girl, 6, maybe 7, had just recoded a sensor protocol by hand, without instructions, without breaking anything. Mara leaned forward. For the first time in months, curiosity flickered beneath the fog. The next morning, Mara found something taped to the inside of her wing's door, a second sticky note. "I didn't mean to spy. The panel was broken. I just like to fix things. Lucy." Mara stood frozen for a long time. Then, without really thinking, she opened her writing drawer and pulled out a blank note card. No signature, no name. Just one line, written neatly in black ink. "What else can you fix?" She slid it under the door. That evening, Henry returned for his shift. As he passed the hallway, he noticed Lucy standing perfectly still in front of the East Wing door, her tiny hand holding a folded note. He knelt beside her. "What's that?" She held it out. She wrote back. Henry took the card slowly. His pulse quickened just slightly. He looked toward the hallway camera, then at the card. Mara Wexler had written back. Not to him. To Lucy. 2 days had passed since the hallway panel stopped blinking. 2 days since Lucy left her glitter-penned sticky note. 2 days since Mara Wexler, a woman whose voice had vanished behind grief, wrote back. And now, Lucy couldn't stop talking about her. "She writes like a grown-up," Lucy whispered to her father that evening, curled in the passenger seat of his aging pickup truck. "She doesn't doodle or anything. Just one sentence, like in a movie." Henry nodded slowly, eyes on the road. "That's not exactly how people talk, sweetheart." "I know," Lucy said, but it was kind of perfect, like she wasn't trying to waste words. Henry glanced at her, then turned away again. He didn't know what concerned him more, the fact that Mara had responded, or how deeply his daughter had already bonded with someone she hadn't even seen. The next day, Lucy brought something new. It was a tiny robot, barely 6 inches tall, made from recycled parts, old phone sensors, and scrap metal she'd found near the maintenance shed. Its eyes blinked with LED lights, and it made a soft chiming sound when it moved. She placed it on the marble floor outside the East Wing door with a small folded note tucked under one wire arm. "You can change the music if you want. Mi chao kung thich jazz." The Vietnamese word sat between the English like a secret. Her mother had spoken both. And every time Lucy used me, It made her feel like her mother was still somewhere near. Inside the room, Mara watched through her feed. The robot stood alone, its head gently tilting from side to side, motion activated. The note was simple, innocent. Yet for reasons she couldn't explain, it lodged itself somewhere deep in her chest. She picked up the robot, carefully, like it might break from breath, and held it in her lap. And then, something astonishing happened. She laughed. Soft, barely audible, more like a breath with warmth. But it happened. The sound startled her. She pressed her hand to her chest, as if to make sure she hadn't imagined it. 3 years. Not a single laugh. And now, here she was, smiling, alone in a room filled with letters no one ever read, with a robot blinking at her like it understood. That evening, Henry found the robot in front of their cottage. It was standing upright, waiting, balanced perfectly, blinking gently. Inside its tiny wire arms was a new note. Jazz, Friday, 7 p.m. Let's meet in silence. Henry stood still, one hand on the doorframe. The handwriting wasn't Lucy's. He unfolded the paper again, just to be sure. It was elegant, centered, precise. The ink was heavier, the edges crisp. Mara. She had sent the robot back with a reply. He didn't say anything to Lucy that night. Not yet. He made dinner as usual, frozen lasagna, garlic toast from the toaster oven, a shared apple for dessert. Lucy chatted through most of it, pausing only when she noticed her father staring at the table a little longer than normal. "Did she say something weird?" she asked quietly. Henry looked up. "Who?" "Mara, the quiet lady." He paused, then gave a small nod. "She wants to meet, sort of." Lucy blinked. "Like meet? She wrote something about Friday. Jazz. Silence." "Oh." Lucy chewed her toast slowly. "That sounds like her." Henry leaned back in his chair. "She's not like you, Lou. I know that. She's been through a lot." Lucy didn't answer. She just looked at her father for a long time. Then she asked the question that caught him off guard. "Do you think she's dangerous?" He froze. It was the question that had been simmering in the back of his own mind since the moment he read that first letter. Was Mara Wexler, wealthy, brilliant, and completely withdrawn, truly safe for his daughter to engage with? Could someone so broken still be trusted with the light of a child like Lucy? Or worse, was he putting Mara in danger by allowing Lucy too close? He rubbed his face with one hand. "I don't know," he finally said. "But I think she's lonely. Not bad. Just hurting." Lucy nodded. "Like you were after Mom?" Henry looked away. "Yes," he whispered. "Maybe just like that." Friday came with soft skies and the smell of orange blossoms drifting in from the backyard. At exactly 6:57 p.m., Lucy stood beside the stereo in the kitchen. She pulled up a playlist marked Mom's Favorites and cued the first track. It was Chet Baker. Warm trumpet, gentle rhythm, melancholy hidden in velvet. Henry looked at her. "You sure about this?" Lucy nodded. "She'll be listening." At 7 p.m., in the East Wing, Mara sat cross-legged on the floor, the robot beside her. When the first note played through the speaker hidden behind her wall, low, sweet, familiar, she closed her eyes. She didn't need a room full of applause. She didn't need conversation. She just needed someone, somewhere, to say, "I'm here, too." And in the soft hum of jazz drifting across the house, she felt that truth settle around her like a blanket. That night, Henry found a new note tucked into the robot's chest. "Your daughter is extraordinary. Thank you for letting her share light." He didn't answer. Not in writing, anyway. Instead, he placed a single paper tulip beside the robot and whispered, Thank you for letting it reach you. The robot became the mailbox. Each night, Henry would finish his shift, wheel his janitor's cart down the dim hallway, and pause in front of the east wing door. He never knocked, never waited. He simply slipped a folded note into the arms of the robot, then turned away. Each morning, Mara would open her door just enough to retrieve the reply, always the same size, always folded twice, always in the same pen, black, slightly faded. They never signed their names. They didn't need to. The first note from Henry came 3 days after the jazz exchange. Short, honest. Her name was Elena. She liked thunderstorms, cheap coffee, and cutting her toast into triangles. She died before I could say goodbye. The next evening, Mara responded. His name was Drew. He wrote me letters every week, 67 of them. On the day I sent number 68, the Marines brought home a box. I never got his reply, and so it began. A conversation through silence, ink replacing breath, paper replacing presence. Each note dug a little deeper, not in desperation, but in trust, tentative, fragile, and unspoken. Henry told her about the hospital nights when Elena would smile with cracked lips and say, "Just keep the lights low. I don't want Lucy to be afraid." Mara wrote about the dreams that stopped after Drew died, how she used to dream in color, vivid, loud, beautiful, and now everything in her sleep was gray. Henry confessed he hadn't slept through the night in 4 years. Mara replied that she hadn't spoken aloud in 3. Some nights, the notes were a single sentence. Do you ever feel guilty for surviving? Every day. And also, not enough. Other nights, the letters were longer, entire pages, front and back. Thoughts too heavy to say out loud, but too painful to keep inside. Mara wrote about the waiting, the way she'd watch the mailbox every afternoon while Drew was deployed, how each letter arrived smelling faintly of dust and engine oil and heat, how she kept all 67 in a shoebox beneath her pillow until the night she got the knock on the door instead. She didn't open the 68th letter. She couldn't. Instead, she burned it. Watched the paper curl in the sink. The ink turned to ash. She didn't even remember what she wrote. I hated myself for that, she added in one note. But I hated the silence more. Henry waited 3 days before replying. Then he wrote, I wrote Elena a letter in the hospital, the last night. She was asleep. I couldn't read it to her. I folded it, put it in my wallet. It's still there. I've never opened it. I'm scared it won't be enough. Mara didn't answer the next night, or the one after. On the 3rd evening, the robot was gone from the hallway. Henry's chest tightened when he saw the empty space. But then, as he turned to leave, something shifted. He looked down. The robot wasn't gone. It had been moved, placed gently beside the marble fountain in the side corridor, under the small skylight. Inside its arms was a note. Maybe it isn't about enough. Maybe it's just about real. The notes continued. Sometimes funny. I hate peppermint tea. Everyone brings me peppermint tea. You should try oatmeal. Lucy swears by it, thinks it's magic, sometimes brutally honest. Do you think we're broken? Yes, but so is stained glass, and people still worship under it. Weeks passed. Mara found herself waking earlier, waiting longer in front of the door. Sometimes she would sit by the robot for an hour after reading the latest note, just letting the words sink in. Henry, in turn, found himself staying at the east wing longer, wiping the same hallway twice just to hear the faint sound of movement behind that door. He still hadn't seen her face, still didn't know the exact shape of her voice, but he knew the shape of her grief, and somehow it matched his. One night, Lucy caught her father staring out the kitchen window for too long. She leaned against the table and said, "You don't smile much anymore." Henry blinked. "Don't I?" You used to. Not a lot. But real ones. Like the ones you made when Mom called you a dork. He let out a breath, half chuckle, half sigh. Lucy hesitated, then asked, "Is Mara sad like you were?" Henry turned slowly to face her. "She's different. But yes, maybe worse." Lucy nodded. "Then I hope you don't leave her alone. People who are that sad forget how to knock on doors." Henry didn't respond, but he picked up his pen again that night. The next letter was simple. "Lucy thinks you're like a puzzle with one piece missing. I told her maybe that's what makes you interesting." Inside the envelope, he tucked a second piece of paper. A blank card. Nothing on it. Just space. A space for her. It started with light. Soft, golden, quiet light, streaming across Mara's bedroom ceiling at exactly 6:79 a.m. For a moment, she thought it was morning. Real morning. The kind she used to wake to when Drew would open the curtains just enough to let in the sun, but not the noise. But then she checked the time. It wasn't real sunlight. It was simulation. Gentle, amber-toned LEDs embedded in the cove lighting above her bed, programmed to mimic the sunrise, exact in its rhythm, natural in its warmth. It hadn't done that before. She sat up slowly, frowning at the ceiling. The light shifted again at 7:02 a.m., softening toward daylight white. Then, at 8:15, the temperature adjusted slightly to match a California morning. Not too warm, not too cold. Mara blinked, then reached for her tablet. She scrolled to the house systems interface. Sure enough, the programming had changed. A new protocol had been written. Clean, simple, perfectly timed with sunlight cycles, adjusting brightness and warmth based on internal circadian algorithms. No system update. No alert from the maintenance team. She hadn't approved any of this. There was only one line in the changelog. User. Lucy Beta 1. Mara exhaled. The robot, the jazz, the sticky notes. Now, sunlight. She smiled, quietly, curiously, and sat with the warmth washing over her. Later that morning, a note arrived, slipped once again through the robot's arms. It was written in uneven purple ink. "This helps you wake up like real sunlight. Mom said people get sad when the sun goes away. I didn't want you to be sad." No signature, just the quiet voice of a child trying to rewrite grief in lines of code. Henry found her reading the note outside the laundry room that evening. He didn't mean to. He'd turned the corner, bucket in hand, and stopped short when he saw her. Mara, sitting on the marble floor, the robot in her lap. For a moment, neither of them moved. She didn't look up, just held the note between her fingers, like it might evaporate if touched too harshly. Henry cleared his throat. "She's always been like that." Mara glanced up. Henry stepped closer, cautiously, like approaching a deer in the woods. "Lucy, she sees things differently." Mara folded the paper. "Where did she learn that code?" Henry leaned against the wall, his posture casual, but his voice careful. "I didn't teach her. I wouldn't know where to start." Mara raised an eyebrow. "Then who did?" There was a long pause. Then gently, Henry said, "Her mom." Mara's expression softened. Henry continued. "Elena wasn't a programmer. Not really. But when she got sick, she started researching anything that could help with energy loss, depression, memory fog. Said she didn't want Lucy to see her as a ghost in the house. So she learned how to simulate sunlight, adjust light cues, stimulate serotonin. All that." He smiled, almost ashamed. "She tested it on herself for months before implementing it. Lucy watched every step. After the funeral, I found her building the light sequence for her own room. Said it helped her feel like Mom was still there in the morning." Mara looked down at the robot, its blinking eyes still lit, and something inside her shifted. It wasn't just sweet. It was survival, That night, she left a longer note than usual. I used to watch the sunrise with Drew every Sunday. Even when he was deployed, I'd set my alarm to match the time zone where he was, just so we could say we watched it together. Then, one morning, I stopped. The sun rose anyway, and I hated it for that. Henry read it in silence, then replied, "After Elena died, I started waking up at 4 a.m., just to be awake before the sun. It felt like beating it at something. But Lucy, she brought it back into the house, and slowly, I stopped being angry when the light came in." The following week, the notes shifted tone. Less about pain, more about patterns. Mara asked Lucy how she'd written the integration. Lucy sent a 3-page letter filled with crude diagrams and smiley faces drawn inside coding brackets. If, wake up time. Sad, play jazz. Else play, birdsong. Mara laughed. Out loud. Again. She wasn't keeping track of how many times it happened anymore, just that it did. At dinner, Lucy watched her father with wide eyes. "She's not broken, Daddy," Henry smiled faintly. "No? Nope, just cracked." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds worse." Lucy shook her head. "Cracks let light in, like when you drop a snow globe and it glows before it leaks." He reached across the table, ruffled her hair. "Where did you get that?" She grinned. "Mom said it once, about you." Henry paused, fork halfway to his mouth. He set it down. The room was quiet, filled with the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. Then he said, "Well, maybe we're all snow globes then." Later that night, Mara stood in her bedroom, watching the light fade into a soft evening amber. She didn't reach for her tablet. She didn't check the interface. She just stood there, letting the light wrap around her like a memory she hadn't known how to miss. And for the first time in a very long while, she whispered into the room. Not loud, not sharp, just enough for herself. "Thank you, Lucy." The day had been long, and the silence in the house was softer than usual, as if the walls themselves were finally learning how to breathe again. Henry had finished his shift early, but Mara asked him, through a note, to stay. Lucy had baked cookies and insisted on sharing. The invitation wasn't formal, not spoken, just a quiet agreement sealed with a nod and the placement of 3 teacups on the table by the garden window. They sat there, Henry on the armchair, Lucy on the floor beside her robot, and Mara cross-legged on the sofa, sharing warm cookies and music from a portable speaker. No one spoke, but no one needed to. Later, Lucy curled up on the rug and fell asleep, hugging her robot like it were alive. The late afternoon sun had faded into a honey-colored dusk. Henry leaned his head back, the kind of weariness in his bones that only came from a long life trying to carry too much. Mara watched him for a while. He wasn't a tall man, but his presence filled the room. There was a steadiness about him, the way his shoulders settled when he exhaled, the way his hands rested calmly over his knees. Not tense, not afraid, just human. He shifted slightly in his seat, and something fell from his jacket pocket. A small black leather wallet, worn at the corners. It landed on the floor beside the sofa. Mara reached for it gently. She meant only to place it on the table. Nothing more. But as she picked it up, it flipped open slightly, revealing a folded note, yellowed with time, carefully tucked behind a faded photo of a woman with soft brown eyes and a tired but sincere smile. The note was old. She could tell by the crinkled edges and the slight oil stain in the center, as if it had been held many times, but never unfolded. She hesitated. Then, without quite meaning to, she opened it. The handwriting was simple, the ink faint, but legible. "If you don't make it, don't let guilt take my place. I'd never want you to live in my absence. I'd want you to live despite it." Mara's hands trembled. She read it again, and again, and again. By the third time, the tears came. They were silent, hot, and uncontrolled, as if her body had stored them for too long and now had no other way to respond. She pressed the paper to her chest and sobbed. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even grief. It was something deeper, more aching. This was the letter she had never received, the one Drew never got the chance to write, the one she had imagined for years but told herself didn't exist. And now, in her hands, was proof that someone, somewhere, had loved with enough clarity to say what needed to be said, even if it hurt. Henry stirred in the chair. His eyes opened slowly, and he blinked toward the ceiling before turning to her. His gaze fell to the wallet in her hands, to the open letter. He didn't speak. Mara looked up, her face streaked with tears, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Henry sat up straighter, but his voice was calm. "You read it?" She nodded. "I shouldn't have." "No," he said. "It's okay." He reached for the note, took it back gently, and stared at the words like he was seeing them for the first time. "I wrote it the night before she died. She was in the hospital, asleep. I knew it was close. I couldn't bring myself to read it to her." He folded it carefully and returned it to his wallet. "So I kept it. Every day, in case I forgot how much she trusted me to live." Mara swallowed the lump in her throat. "It's beautiful." Henry leaned forward. "She knew I'd punish myself, that I'd carry the weight. But she also knew me well enough to leave this behind." Mara looked down at her hands. "I waited for something like that, for months. A sign, a note, anything." Henry didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. The room was quiet again, but not heavy. It was the kind of silence that forms only when two people share something sacred. Not romantic, not expected, just real. "I hated him for dying," Mara said after a long pause. Henry nodded slowly. "I hated her for being sick." They both gave a small half-laugh, and somehow, in the sorrow of it, something like peace took root. Henry stood up and crossed the room. He pulled a blanket from the back of the sofa and draped it over Lucy. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. Mara watched him. "You're good with her," she said. It was the first spoken sentence she had said to him. Ever. He turned slowly, meeting her eyes. "She keeps me human." Mara's voice trembled. "You keep me from disappearing." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even a thank you. It was just the truth. That night, after Henry and Lucy had left, Mara sat on the floor of her room. The robot blinked softly beside her. Her journal lay open in her lap. She picked up her pen. Not to write to Drew. Not to herself. Not even to Henry. Just to write. Because now, there was a world outside her skin again. And it had hands that didn't want her to vanish. The door opened at 6:04 p.m. It wasn't loud. It didn't creak or groan. In fact, it made almost no sound at all. Just a soft click, followed by the quiet shuffle of someone unsure if they were allowed to cross a threshold that had once been sealed like a tomb. Henry had just finished wiping down the banister in the adjacent hallway when he heard it. He paused, mop in hand. Then, slowly, he turned. The east wing door, long closed, always locked from the inside, stood ajar. And there she was. Mara Wexler, standing in the light of her own doorway. She wasn't the ghost he had imagined. Not pale, not trembling, not dressed in black like some gothic novel figure. She wore a soft gray sweater and jeans. Her hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, and there was a single smear of ink on the side of her thumb. She looked real. And that, somehow, was more jarring than anything else. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, a little dry, like a muscle just remembering how to move, but it was steady. Sure. Henry didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. I would. The tea was already steeped. She poured 2 cups and set them on a low table in the corner of the room, next to a wide window that looked out over the western hills. There were no fancy napkins, no sugar cubes, just warmth. Simplicity. Henry sat carefully across from her, unsure of the rules. They hadn't prepared for this moment. There were no notes, no rehearsed pleasantries, just paper and ink that had run out of room, and now, finally, voices to carry the rest. You don't have to talk, Mara said, almost reading his mind. Henry smiled faintly. That's good. I'm better at listening. They sat like that for a while, sipping, letting the silence settle. Not awkward, not forced. Just the kind of stillness that only happens when 2 people have already said the most important things without saying anything at all. The knock came 15 minutes later. 3 soft taps. Mara looked up, surprised. Who? Henry stood. That's Lucy. Mara blinked. You brought her? She doesn't like being left in the car longer than 20 minutes. She times me. Mara hesitated. Then, before she could think better of it, she said, She can come in, if she wants. Henry opened the door. Lucy stepped in with a small bounce, her shoes making barely a sound on the hardwood. She held a robot in one hand and a bag of red licorice in the other. She stopped when she saw Mara. Hi, she said. Mara nodded. Hello. Lucy looked at the teacups, then at her dad. You're drinking from real cups, not thermos cups? Henry gave a sheepish shrug. Apparently, we're civilized now. Lucy turned to Mara with wide eyes. You opened the door. I did. Why? Mara considered that. Because sometimes it's easier to walk through something when someone else is already standing there. Lucy didn't quite understand, but she grinned anyway. She plopped down on the rug between them, set the robot on the table, and announced, I brought Mozart. Mozart? Henry asked. Lucy nodded. The robot. This one plays music. Only classical, though, because jazz made his circuits twitchy. Mara laughed, a real open laugh. Henry watched her and felt something in his chest unfold. Lucy pushed the licorice across the table. Want one? Mara took a piece, her fingers brushing Lucy's for the briefest moment. There was no tension, no hesitation, just a quiet understanding that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't strange. It was simply new. 20 minutes passed, then 40, then an hour. Lucy sprawled across the rug, her head in Mara's lap, robot blinking beside her. She hummed softly to the music playing in the background, a Mozart concerto, of course. Henry sipped his tea, now lukewarm, and felt a calm he hadn't known in years. Mara looked down at the child sleeping across her knees and whispered, Is this what it feels like? Henry turned to her. What? To belong somewhere again. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. At 8:13 p.m., Lucy stirred and sat up, blinking the sleep from her eyes. Did I miss anything? Henry ruffled her hair. Just Mozart misbehaving again? Lucy looked at Mara. Did he break? No, Mara smiled. He just needed new programming. Lucy yawned and stretched. Grown-ups always do. As they stood to leave, Mara walked them to the door. Henry paused on the threshold. She looked at him, then gently reached out and touched his arm. Thank you for showing up. He nodded, voice quiet. Thank you for opening the door. Mara crouched and hugged Lucy softly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't tearful. But it was real. Good night, Mozart, Lucy whispered to her robot as they left. Good night, Lucy, Mara whispered back. That night, as Mara returned to her room, the air felt warmer. lighter. She opened the windows just a little, not for fresh air, but to let the laughter linger. The private jet touched down at precisely 10:42 a.m. By 11:30, Raymond Wexler stood in the center of his sprawling estate, briefcase still in hand, phone still vibrating with unread messages, and jaw clenched so tightly that his assistant knew better than to speak. 3 months away. He had left when Mara was still silent, still behind her door, still unreachable. He had made peace with that, or at least convinced himself that distance was mercy. But now, something had changed. "Sir, would you like me to carry your—" the housekeeper started. "No," he interrupted, voice clipped. "Where's my daughter?" "She's in the west parlor, I believe." With who?" The housekeeper hesitated. "With Mr. Callahan, sir, and his daughter." Raymond stopped walking. His eyebrows drew together, slow and deliberate. "You let a janitor into my daughter's wing?" "He was invited." Raymond narrowed his eyes. "By who?" "By Miss Wexler, sir." When he entered the parlor, he expected disaster. Expected to find his daughter in distress, disoriented, confused. Instead, he found her sitting cross-legged on the floor with a little girl curled beside her, and a robot, yes, a robot, humming softly on the rug. Henry Callahan was in the far corner, folding laundry with casual ease like he belonged there. Raymond didn't move, didn't speak. Not until Mara looked up. She met his gaze, calm and steady, and said nothing. Raymond finally broke the silence. "What the hell is going on here?" Henry stood, slow and unbothered. "We're just visiting." Raymond's tone dropped like cold iron. "No. You're trespassing." Lucy sat up from the rug. "We were having tea." Raymond ignored her. "Mara, are you all right?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." She frowned. "I'm not 5, Dad. Don't talk about me like I'm not in the room." He turned toward Henry. "What did you do to her?" Henry didn't answer. "Not yet." Raymond took a step forward. "You think just because you mopped a few floors, you earned your way into my family's grief, into my daughter's head?" Henry's jaw clenched, but he remained still. "You don't belong here," Raymond continued. "She's alive because of the care I've paid for. Medication, therapists, not because of some blue-collar charity case pretending he understands loss." Mara stood now, but it wasn't Mara who spoke. It was Lucy. She stepped forward, chin lifted high, eyes bright with something between innocence and defiance. "You know," she said, "when grown-ups talk like that, it makes my dad sad." Raymond blinked, startled. Lucy walked closer. "But that's okay. I can fix you." "What?" "I fix things. Code, circuits, robots, even lights that don't want to turn on. So maybe I can fix you too. Maybe make you a version that doesn't forget to say kind things." Mara gasped, half laugh, half disbelief. Henry looked like he'd swallowed a cough. Raymond stared at Lucy. "Excuse me?" "You don't need to yell," she said. "Yelling is lazy coding." The room was frozen. Then Mara covered her mouth to stifle a smile. Raymond turned to her, voice tight. "You think this is funny?" "I think," she said slowly, "it's the first time anyone's talked back to you with actual love." Henry stepped in now, his tone firm but measured. "Sir, I didn't mean to overstep. I was asked to be here." "By whom?" Raymond demanded. Mara answered. "By me." Raymond blinked. "You invited them?" "Yes." "You let strangers into your wing?" Mara looked him dead in the eyes. "No, Dad. I let people in." There was a long, heavy silence. No one moved. Even the robot stopped blinking. Then Raymond shook his head. "You needed professionals, specialists, not this." Mara took a breath. "I needed kindness. I needed silence that didn't scream. I needed someone to listen instead of analyze. She looked at Henry. And I needed someone to walk past the door and not run when they saw what was behind it. Henry lowered his gaze, unsure what to say. But Lucy... She took Mara's hand, and that was answer enough. Raymond exhaled sharply, as if trying to suppress something in his chest that felt too much like failure. He turned away. I'll be in my office. Of course you will, Mara said. He froze, then walked out. Henry let out a slow breath and looked at Mara. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't. He glanced down at Lucy, then back up. We can go if... No, Mara said firmly. You stay. She turned toward her room. I'm going to make more tea. As she walked away, Lucy leaned toward her dad and whispered, I think we just updated his software. Henry knelt beside her. That was brave, you know. Lucy shrugged. So was coming to see her in the first place. He smiled. Maybe bravery runs in the family. In his office upstairs, Raymond sat alone. The house, which he had built with money, controlled with logic, and sealed with fear, suddenly felt too large. He pulled up a live feed from the parlor camera. He saw his daughter pouring tea, smiling, not performing, just being. He stared at the screen, one hand trembling slightly over the mouse. Then, slowly, he closed the window. It was just past 9 in the morning when Mara knocked on her father's office door. The knock itself was enough to throw Raymond Wexler off balance. No one knocked. Not here, and certainly not her. He opened the door slowly, expecting perhaps a staff member, maybe even Henry. But there she stood, his daughter, dressed in a soft navy blouse, hair pinned back loosely, and eyes clear in a way he hadn't seen since the funeral. Mara, he asked cautiously. I'd like to walk with you, she said, if you're not too busy. Raymond blinked. Of course. He set aside his tablet and followed her down the hall, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. He chose silence. She didn't. They turned left at the gallery hall, passing a wall of family portraits. Mara didn't glance at them. Not yet. Instead, she led him through the west corridor, the one that had once been locked off from everyone. This way, she said gently. He followed, and noticed, for the first time, the subtle changes. The hallway lights were warmer, less clinical. A series of wall sensors flickered softly with hand-drawn icons, sun, moon, music notes, all arranged in childlike but intelligent symmetry. She paused at a console beneath one of the lights. Lucy fixed this, she said. The timing used to flicker. Made my sleep worse. But she wrote her own code to mimic sunrise. Raymond said nothing. They turned the corner. At the base of the staircase was a small planter, terracotta, cracked slightly on one edge. Inside, a hydrangea bloomed, pale blue. Strong. I thought it had died, Mara murmured. It was Mom's. She planted it the year before she passed. Raymond stared at it. I never had the heart to throw it away, Mara continued. But I didn't know how to bring it back. She looked up. Lucy waters it every other morning, with a tiny red watering can. Raymond's throat tightened. She sings while she does it, Mara added. Off-key. It's terrible. Raymond gave a short, breathy chuckle. They moved on. She stopped at a cabinet near the far study, unlocked it, pulled out a simple wooden box, cedar, with brass hinges dulled by time. She held it in both hands and looked at him. These are all the letters I wrote that I never sent. I used to write to Drew, to myself, sometimes to you. Not that you'd ever see them. She opened the box, dozens of folded sheets, some neat, some crumpled at the edges. One had a faint ring of a teacup on it. Dad, she said softly, you hired 36 people to fix me. Raymond didn't move. None of them stayed, she continued. Not because they were bad, but because they didn't know how to stay. She stepped closer. But one man walked past a locked door and left a note that said 6 words, and then came back the next day. Raymond's brow furrowed. I understand. Afghanistan, 2009. She didn't come home. Her father inhaled, slow and sharp. And from that note, Mara said, voice steady, I started to remember how to speak again. They stood in silence. Raymond looked down at the box of unsent letters. He finally said, I didn't know you were writing. I didn't know I wanted to be read, she replied. They stood there a while longer, surrounded by everything he had missed, not out of malice, but out of fear. Raymond rubbed a hand across his jaw. I just wanted you safe. I know. I didn't know how to help. Mara smiled sadly. That was the problem. You kept trying to help. I just needed someone to be. He looked at her, really looked. Not as the daughter who needed fixing, not as a fragile figure he had to shield, but as a woman, a survivor, someone who had stood up, and now was helping him do the same. I owe him an apology, Raymond said quietly. Mara raised her eyebrows. Henry? He nodded. I think he'd accept it, she replied. He's not here to be a hero, just someone who shows up. Raymond exhaled. I haven't been that man in a long time. Mara stepped forward and placed the box of letters into her father's hands. You still can be. Back in the parlor, Lucy was trying to teach the robot how to dance. It wasn't going well. Every time she spun it in one direction, it bumped into the leg of the coffee table and chirped in confusion. Henry watched from the kitchen doorway, smiling quietly. Raymond entered behind him, slower this time. Henry turned, unsure whether to speak. Raymond approached him with deliberate steps. There was no anger in his expression now, only gravity. I spoke out of turn, Raymond said. I disrespected you. I judged without understanding. Henry stood tall. I've been judged before, sir. I know, Raymond replied, but not by someone who should have known better. He paused. Thank you for not walking away. Henry gave a small nod. I didn't have anywhere better to be. Raymond offered his hand. Henry took it. From across the room, Mara watched as her father and the man she had come to trust, perhaps more than she'd trusted anyone in years, stood in quiet truce. Lucy looked up from her robot. Are they friends now? She asked. Mara smiled. They're trying. Good, Lucy said, yawning, because this house has too many rooms for one person. That night, after everyone had gone home, Raymond sat at his desk. He opened the cedar box of letters and began to read. Each one after the other, until the sun began to rise. The morning sky hung low with clouds, quiet and gray, the kind that made the world seem softer somehow. Mara stood at the window of her room, watching the slow sway of the trees outside, her fingers resting on the edge of her writing desk. The house was still. Not just quiet, but still, balanced, waiting. She reached for her pen. The paper was heavier than usual, thicker, cream-colored, the kind Drew had always preferred for his handwritten notes. For months after his death, she couldn't even look at it. Now she unfolded a single sheet and smoothed it flat, her hand steady. Then she wrote, not with hesitation, not with pain, but with clarity. Dear Drew, it's been a long time. For months, years, really. I thought my only job was to survive the silence you left behind. I tried to write to you every day. I poured out everything I couldn't say out loud. And still, nothing changed. I kept waiting for a sign that it was okay to keep breathing, that moving on didn't mean betrayal, that laughter wouldn't erase your memory. I never got that sign. But someone else gave me something else. He didn't fix me. He didn't try. He just stayed. And somehow, in the space between his silence and his daughter's kindness, I found the pieces of myself I'd buried with you. I still love you, but I won't die beside you. I've started living again, and the man I've come to care for, he doesn't love me because I'm strong. He loves me because I let him see that I'm not. That's how I know I'm ready to let go. Thank you for loving me first. Mara. She folded the letter carefully, slid it into a simple white envelope, and sealed it with trembling fingers. Then she stood. This time, when she opened her door, it didn't creak. The cemetery was quiet, too. Not the cold, sharp kind of quiet, but the kind that wraps itself around you like an old sweater. Familiar. Forgiving. She walked the path slowly, her boots crunching softly against the gravel. The letter was tucked inside her coat, close to her heart. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if the words themselves were already lifting something off her chest. The headstone came into view. It was simple, just the way Drew would have wanted. No engraved poems, no gold trim, just his name, rank, and the dates that had come too soon. She knelt beside it, ran her fingers gently over the letters. For the first time, she didn't cry, not out of strength, but out of peace. She pulled the envelope from her coat and placed it at the base of the stone, weighing it down with a small, flat rock. Then, after a long breath, she whispered, "I don't need you to forgive me. I needed to forgive myself." The wind stirred, and for the briefest moment, the clouds broke, just enough for a single strand of sunlight to fall across the stone. She didn't believe in signs anymore, but she smiled anyway. Back at home, the house felt warmer, not by temperature, but by presence. Lucy greeted her with a tight hug that didn't need explanation. She always knew when something had shifted. "Did you say what you needed to say?" she asked. Mara nodded. "Good," Lucy whispered. "Then maybe he can rest now, and you can start dancing." Mara laughed softly. "I haven't danced in years." "Then it's time," Lucy said, matter of fact. Henry entered the room, a towel slung over his shoulder, faint flour dust on his hands from something he'd tried, and probably failed, to bake. He stopped when he saw her, and in that pause, wordless and steady, he knew. She had done it. She had let go. He didn't ask for details. He just reached out, and she took his hand. That night, Mara wrote again. Not a letter this time. Just a single line in her journal. I didn't send it to be read. I sent it to set myself free. Then she closed the journal and turned off the lamp. The room darkened, slowly, in sync with the lighting program Lucy had refined weeks ago. Warm amber, fading to soft blue. A rhythm not of sadness, but of rest. And in that darkness, for the first time in 3 years, Mara slept without dreaming of what she had lost. She dreamed instead of a little girl with a robot, a man with quiet eyes, and a world that was still broken, but no longer empty. The morning sun stretched slowly over the garden, casting soft gold across the dew-tipped grass. Birds sang without urgency, and the wind, for once, moved like it had nowhere to be. It was the kind of day people often called ordinary, until something quiet made it unforgettable. In the middle of the garden, beside the freshly bloomed hydrangeas, and under the old oak that Elena once loved, stood a new robot. It wasn't tall, it wasn't sleek, but it was special. It had a smooth white shell, rounded edges, and 2 blinking eyes that changed color based on nearby sound. On its chest, printed in Lucy's uneven handwriting, was one word in block letters. Hope 2.0. Henry squatted down beside it, inspecting the details. The wiring was tight, the software clean. The tiny speaker beneath the core had been repurposed from an old music box. "Looks like your best one yet," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. Lucy stood beside him, arms crossed proudly. It has a memory chip now, so even if the power cuts out, it remembers the last thing it heard. Henry smiled. Why not name it Lucy 2.0? Lucy glanced toward the house, where Mara stood just beyond the screen door, barefoot on the porch. Because, she said, this one's for her. Henry looked back at his daughter. She needs something that doesn't disappear when she turns away, Lucy added. Something that stays. Henry's throat tightened. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her and wondered how a 6-year-old understood grief in a way most adults never would. A moment later, the door creaked open. Mara stepped out, sunlight kissing the top of her shoulders as she walked barefoot toward them. She moved with quiet grace, no longer tentative, no longer hollow. She held something in her hands, another letter, but this one not folded, not sealed. It was open. Brave. She knelt beside Henry and Lucy, holding the letter out with a quiet smile. This time, she said, it's not to be hidden. It's not to be burned or tucked away in a box. Henry accepted the paper, but didn't open it. He didn't have to. Because some letters weren't meant to be read. They were meant to be received. Lucy reached down and tapped the robot's head. It chimed softly, then blinked 3 times. Now, she said, it listens, and when it hears kindness, it glows. Kindness? Henry asked. She nodded. It's programmed to light up when people say things that sound like hope, or love, or peace. Mara's eyes misted. Does it ever turn off? Lucy shrugged. Only when the house goes empty again. Henry chuckled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. That's not happening anytime soon. They sat there for a while. No rush, no expectations. Henry on one side, Mara on the other, Lucy in the middle, quietly humming something that sounded vaguely like Beethoven, but with the rhythm of a skipping child. The breeze danced through the leaves. Hope 2.0 blinked. The light turned a soft, steady green. Raymond stood at the upstairs window, watching them. He didn't interrupt, didn't call out. Just watched as the daughter he once tried to shield with silence was now surrounded by voices that didn't demand anything from her. Just presence. And for once, Raymond didn't feel helpless. He felt proud. Later that day, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the garden began to cool, Mara placed her journal on the porch table and opened it. On the first blank page, she wrote, "Hope is not a miracle. Hope is the quiet company of someone who stays when you can't explain why you still hurt." She closed the journal, then stood, walked back into the garden, and sat beside Lucy once more. That evening, Henry cooked dinner. Actual dinner, not frozen. Real garlic, real herbs. A mess in the kitchen and flour on his shirt. Lucy insisted on setting the table with folded napkins and name tags written in crayon. Mara laughed when she saw hers. It read, Mara 2.0, alive and curious. They ate under the soft hum of overhead lights, jazz playing in the background, and the sound of a robot softly clicking as it tried to sing along. There was no toast, no ceremony, just a family. One not defined by blood, but by the courage to stay, to see, and to forgive. That night, as Lucy drifted to sleep with the robot beside her bed, Mara stood in the hallway watching them. Henry appeared beside her, quiet as ever. "She'll be okay," he said. Mara looked at him. "She already is." They stood side by side in the hush of the house. And for the first time in years, no one was hiding behind a door. No one was waiting for a knock. No one needed to be fixed. We'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? Tell us in the comments below. Your stories, your presence, they mean more than you know. If this story touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. There are more gentle, powerful stories waiting to find you. Stories of kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that often go unnoticed. Thank you for spending your time with us today. In a world that moves too fast, we're grateful you chose to slow down and feel something real. Until next time, take care of your heart and of each other.